I got married at 15 to a man who got me pregnant, survived his alcoholism, rebuilt my life from scratch, married again to someone who seemed like my savior, and only discovered who Ruby Fitzgerald really was at 40, when I finally had the courage to look in the mirror and not recognize the prisoner I had become. My name is Ruby, and this is the story of how I died twice before learning how to truly live. It's not a pretty story. It's not an easy story, but it's real. It's mine. And if you're watching this now, maybe it's because a part of you recognizes something here that you're afraid to name in your own life. I was born in a small town in rural Kentucky, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay hidden for long. My house was simple, humble, but there was love until the day there wasn't any more. I was 7 years old when my parents separated, and it was as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. My mother, who had always been a strong woman, a hard worker, suddenly began to wither like a flower without water. Depression took over her in a way that I, as a child, couldn't understand. I just knew that my mother was there, but at the same time she wasn't. And then one day, she simply left. Without explanation, without goodbye, without promise of return. My father did what he could, but he worked all day at the furniture factory and could barely keep up with the bills. I went to live with my older sister, Rachel, who was only 19 and was already trying to build her own life. She took me, fed me, clothed me, but she couldn't fill the hole my mother had left. I became a silent child. I learned very early that talking about what I felt only made things heavier for everyone. So I swallowed my words, swallowed my pain, swallowed my fear of being abandoned again. And that silence, that inability to say no, to say this is hurting me, to say I deserve more, would be the root of almost everything that would come later. I was 14 when I met Danny Mitchell. He was 26. I know what you're thinking right now, and you're right, but at the time, I didn't see it that way. I saw a man who paid attention to me, who made me feel special, who filled the emptiness my mother had left. He would show up after school, take me out for hamburgers at the drive-in, tell me I was different from other girls, more mature, prettier, more interesting. He made me feel seen. And when you've spent your whole life feeling invisible, that kind of attention is like a drug. You don't question it, you just accept it and are grateful that someone finally chose you. My sister didn't like it at all when she found out. She screamed, cried, called me irresponsible, said Danny was too old, that it was wrong. But I didn't listen. How could I listen when Danny was the only person who seemed to really want me? So I lied, said I had broken up with him, but I kept seeing Danny in secret, and 6 months later, I was pregnant, 15 years old and pregnant. The pregnancy test trembling in my hand in the gas station bathroom. The world collapsing again, but this time in a different way. It wasn't just me anymore. Now there was another life depending on me, and I barely knew how to take care of myself. Danny said he would take responsibility, said he would marry me, that we would be a family, that he would take care of me and the baby. And for a moment, I believed that maybe things could work out. Maybe this was my chance to have a family again, to belong somewhere, to not be alone. We got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, just me, him, and 2 witnesses. My sister was there, with a closed face and red eyes. She didn't approve, but she was present. And that, in some twisted way, gave me hope. My son was born when I had just turned 16. I was a child, taking care of another child. I didn't know how to change a diaper properly, didn't know how to calm his crying, didn't know what to do when he had a fever. Danny helped in the beginning. He worked as a mechanic and brought money home, but the money was never enough, and the bills started piling up. And that's when I started to notice the smell of beer, of whiskey, of something stronger. Danny had always liked to drink, but now it was different. Now he drank to forget, to escape, to endure the life we had built or that had collapsed before it even began. The first times he came home drunk, I pretended not to see. I heated up the food, put him to bed, cleaned the vomit from the bathroom. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that the stress would pass, that he would get better when things settled down. But things didn't settle down. They only got worse. The nights when he didn't come home started to become frequent. The excuses got weaker, and I, at 17, was already trapped in a cycle I didn't know how to break. Excuse, forgive, wait, suffer, repeat. I learned to sew from a neighbor's mother. She had an old sewing machine that she lent me, and I started making clothes to sell. Pants, simple dresses, shirts. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was my money, earned by me, and that gave me a taste of freedom I didn't know existed. I worked at night, after my son went to sleep, the sound of the machine filling the silence of the empty house. And it was this work, this skill, that would save me years later, but at that moment, I was just trying to survive the next day. Danny started having affairs. The first was with a waitress at the bar where he spent his nights. I found out by accident when a friend of hers told me, with pity in her eyes. I confronted Danny, and he denied it, called me crazy, jealous, paranoid, said I was making things up because I was stressed with the baby. And I, 20 years younger than him, without experience, without self-confidence, believed him. Or rather, I wanted to believe, because accepting the truth meant accepting that I had made the wrong choice, that I had thrown my life away, that I was trapped. But the truth has a way of appearing, no matter how much you try to bury it. I found messages, photos, phone numbers written on bar napkins, and each discovery was like a new cut in a wound that never healed. Danny would ask for forgiveness, cry, swear he would change, that it would never happen again. And I forgave, not because I believed him, but because I didn't know how to live without him. He was all I had, my family, my provider, my son's father. How could I leave? Where would I go? Who would want a teenager with a baby and no diploma? At 22, I finally got something that was just mine, a house. It was through a government housing program for low-income families. It was small, needed renovation, but it had a backyard and 2 large windows in the living room that let the sun in. I cried when I received the keys. It wasn't just a house, it was proof that I could build something, even in the midst of chaos. I renovated that place with my own hands, painted the walls, fixed the faucets, planted flowers in the garden, and for a brief moment, I thought that maybe things could get better, that maybe having our own house would make Danny feel more responsible, more present, more human. But a home doesn't fix a broken man. Danny kept drinking, kept disappearing, kept cheating on me, and I kept staying, because now I had a house to pay for, bills to manage, a son to raise. I opened a small sewing business in the back room and started taking larger orders. Party dresses, baby clothes, tailoring alterations. The business grew slowly, but it grew, and for the first time in my life, I felt I had a purpose beyond surviving. I was building something. I was becoming someone. I just didn't know yet that this strength I was developing would be tested in ways I never imagined. I was 28 when I finally broke up with Danny for good. After 13 years together, countless betrayals, broken promises, and sleepless nights waiting for him to come home, I said, enough. There was no big confrontation. No drama. I simply woke up one morning, looked at him sleeping on the couch, smelling of alcohol and disappointment, and knew that if I stayed one more day, I would die inside. And when you've already lost so much in life, the only thing you can't lose is yourself. So I filed for divorce, and for the first time in over a decade, I breathed deeply and felt something like hope. I was free. Or at least, I thought I was, because what I didn't know is that Danny was just the first chapter of my story, and the next would be much, much worse. That's when I met Marcus, and he looked at me in a way that made me forget everything Danny had taught me about distrusting men who seemed too good to be true. Marcus Caldwell entered my life like a silent tornado, the kind you don't notice until you're already in the center of it. I met him at a local craft fair where I was selling my sewing pieces. He stopped at my booth, examined a dress I had made, and said, "This is real work. You have talent." No one had ever talked to me like that. Danny never recognized my work, never complimented me, never made me feel I was good at anything. But Marcus, this tall man with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to really see me, made me feel, for the first time in years, that I was worth something beyond being a mother and ex-wife of an alcoholic. He came back the next Sunday, and the next, and the next. He always bought something small, always struck up a conversation, always made me laugh in a way I had forgotten was possible. Marcus was different from Danny in every way. He was sober, worked as a manager at a car dealership, had his own house, wore clean and pressed clothes, and most importantly, he treated me as if I were valuable. After a month of conversations at that fair, he invited me to dinner. I hesitated. My son was 11. I had just gotten out of a destructive marriage. I didn't know if I was ready. But something about him made me want to try. Something about him told me that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be happy. The first 6 months with Marcus were like living in a dream. He took me to restaurants I had never set foot in, introduced me to his friends as the incredible woman I met, sent me good morning messages every day. He was attentive to my son, patient, caring. He took us fishing at the lake, bowling, to watch movies at the theater. My son, who had grown up watching his drunk and absent father, finally had a stable male figure in his life. And I, after so long carrying the world alone, finally had someone to share the weight with. Marcus made me feel protected, cared for, loved. I lowered my guard. I trusted. I opened my heart again. We got married after a year of dating. It was a small but beautiful ceremony in the church garden with my friends and family present. My sister Rachel was there, this time really smiling, happy to see me happy. Marcus made beautiful vows, promised to love me in good times and bad, promised to be the father my son deserved, and when he put the ring on my finger, I felt my life was finally really beginning. I was 32, had a growing business, a healthy son, and now a husband who seemed to be everything Danny never was. I thought I had learned the right lessons. I thought this time I had chosen well. I was so wrong. The changes started subtle, almost imperceptible. First, it was the cell phone. Marcus started asking me who had called, who had sent a message, why I was smiling when I looked at my phone. At first, I thought it was cute. He's jealous because he loves me so much. I thought he said he just wanted to make sure no one was disrespecting me, that he just wanted to protect me. And I, used to Danny's neglect, interpreted this attention as care. I didn't see it was control. I didn't see he was mapping every aspect of my life, identifying who my connections were, who gave me strength, who could help me get out if things got bad. Then came work. Marcus started questioning why I needed to work so much, why I stayed up late sewing, why I had to go to fairs every weekend. You don't need that anymore, Ruby, he would say. I earn enough for both of us. You should stay home, rest, take care of us. It seemed like generosity. It seemed like love. But what he was really saying was, you don't need financial independence. You don't need a business of your own. You don't need anything but me. But I still didn't understand his language. I still thought I was being loved, when in reality I was being isolated. My son was the next target. Marcus started creating strict rules for him. No going out with friends without permission. No video games after 7 at night. No talking back. No questioning. No personality of his own. He needs to learn discipline, Marcus would say. You are too soft with him. I'm going to teach him to be a man. And somehow, I let him because I thought Marcus knew better, that he was being a good stepfather. That structure was love. But my son started getting quiet, started spending more time locked in his room, started looking at me with a sadness I knew well, because I had seen it in the mirror years ago. The criticisms started slowly. Marcus would point out that I had gained weight, that my hair was dull, that I didn't dress up like I used to. Not that you're not beautiful, he would say, but you could try harder. For me, for us. So I started dressing up more. Hair was done, makeup impeccable, clothes he approved of, but it was never enough. There was always something wrong. The skirt too short, the blouse too low cut, the lipstick too red. Are you trying to get other men's attention? He would ask, and I hurried to explain that no, I just wanted to look pretty for him, that he was the only man who mattered. I was apologizing for existing, and didn't even realize it. My friends started disappearing. Not because I wanted them to, but because Marcus always had a reason for me not to meet with them. That friend of yours is a bad influence. She's divorced. You know how those women are. Or, why do you need to go out with the girls? I don't go out with the guys. Aren't we enough for each other? And I'm wanting to be the perfect wife, the ideal partner, canceled the meetings, made up excuses. I'm tired. I have too much work. Marcus needs me at home. And little by little, the calls stopped, the invitations stopped, and I was left alone with Marcus. Exactly as he wanted. He started checking my cell phone openly. He would take the phone from my hand, read my messages, check my social media, look at my call history. Couples don't have secrets, he would say. If you have nothing to hide, why do you care? And I let him. I gave him the password to my phone, my email, my bank account. I became an open book to him, while he remained a mystery to me. I couldn't touch his phone. It has confidential work information, he explained. You wouldn't understand anyway. And I accepted it, because questioning Marcus meant starting an argument that would last hours and end with me apologizing for things I didn't even know I had done. Sex changed too. In the beginning, Marcus was affectionate, attentive, patient, but now it had become an obligation, a way for him to reaffirm control. It didn't matter if I was tired, sick, or simply not in the mood. A good wife doesn't deny her husband, he would say. And I raised in a church where I was taught that submission was virtue, that obeying your husband was a commandment, forced myself to be present when my body and mind were absent. I learned to fake pleasure, to fake desire, to fake that this was love and not abuse disguised as intimacy. My sister Rachel was the first to notice. She showed up at the house one Sunday, unannounced, and found Marcus yelling at me because I had burned the chicken for lunch. It wasn't a normal, frustrated yell. It was a yell loaded with contempt, with disproportionate anger, with something much deeper and scarier. Rachel pulled me into the bedroom and asked, "Ruby, what's happening here?" And I, for the first time, couldn't lie. I started to cry. Not a pretty movie cry, but an ugly, desperate cry of someone who was drowning and finally admitted she couldn't swim alone. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Rachel held my face with both hands and said something that would be etched in my mind forever. "Ruby, you're not doing anything wrong. He's doing something very, very wrong to you." But I wasn't ready to hear it. I defended Marcus, said he was stressed with work, that I had provoked him, that I really had burned the lunch and he had a right to be irritated. Rachel looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration and said, "When you're ready, call me. I'll be here." And she left, leaving a heavy silence that I tried to fill with all possible justifications for Marcus's behavior. I started noticing patterns. Marcus was charming in public. At family parties, church meetings, dinners with friends, he was the perfect husband. Attentive, funny, kind. People told me all the time how lucky I was, how Marcus was a wonderful man, how I had gotten it right this time, and I would smile and agree, while inside I felt crazy. Because the Marcus they saw wasn't the Marcus who locked the bedroom door and interrogated me for hours about where I had been, who I had talked to, why I had taken 10 extra minutes at the supermarket. It was like living two simultaneous realities, and no one but me knew which was the real one. And then came the day I found his second cell phone. It was by accident. I was looking for his wallet to get money for the pizza the delivery guy had brought, and at the bottom of the drawer, under papers and old receipts, there was a smartphone I had never seen. My heart raced. My hands trembled. I knew I shouldn't look, but I also knew that if I didn't look, it would consume me. So I turned on the device. It had no password, and when the screen lit up, I saw messages. Dozens, hundreds of messages. With women. Amen. With names I didn't know. Photos I couldn't unsee. Words that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my husband, about my entire life. Marcus wasn't just controlling me. He was living a complete parallel life while keeping me trapped in a cage of lies, manipulation, and false devotion. I stood in the living room, holding that phone like it was a grenade about to explode, reading message after message, seeing photo after photo, diving deeper and deeper into a hole that seemed bottomless. These weren't just casual conversations. They were relationships, multiple relationships, with women he told he loved, to whom he made the same promises he had made me, who received the same obsessive attention I thought was exclusively mine. One of them was pregnant. I read the message 3 times to make sure I wasn't going crazy. "Can't wait to meet our baby," she wrote, and he responded with heart emojis, with promises of being there at birth, with plans for a future that included her but didn't include me. While I was at home, being the obedient wife, he was building entire families with other women. My body reacted before my mind. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Everything I had eaten that day came out, along with any illusion that still remained about who Marcus really was. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, hugging the toilet, and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about myself, about my ability to judge people, about my own reality. If Marcus managed to fool me so completely, for so long, what else in my life was a lie? Who could I trust? How could I trust myself again? I didn't confront Marcus that day. I know it seems cowardly, but I was in deep shock. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, cleaned my face, pretended everything was normal when he got home. He kissed me on the forehead, asked how my day had been, served dinner, watched TV on the couch as if he hadn't just destroyed our life, and I played along. Smiled, talked, pretended, because I needed time to process, to plan, to understand what to do with the bomb that had just exploded in my chest. But inside, I was dying. Every second pretending normalcy was like swallowing glass. The nights became impossible. I would lie next to him and feel disgusted. Disgusted with him. Disgusted with myself for being there. Disgusted with every moment I had wasted believing empty words. I couldn't sleep. I would stare at the ceiling, counting the hours until the sun came up, feeling my heart beat so hard I was sure it would explode. I lost weight rapidly. 10 pounds in 2 weeks. My clothes started getting loose. My face became hollow, deep dark circles settled permanently. People asked if I was sick. And I was sick with lies, sick with manipulation, sick with living in a prison disguised as marriage. It took 3 weeks to finally confront him. 3 weeks of silent agony, of rehearsing what I would say, of imagining all possible reactions. I waited for him to get home from work, sat at the kitchen table with his secret phone in front of me, and when he walked through the door, I simply said, "Explain this to me." He looked at the device, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something on his face I had never seen before. Pure panic. But it was only a fraction of a second. Then the mask returned, and he transformed into the Marcus I had learned to fear. "You went through my things," he said, and somehow, magically, I became the villain of the story. What followed was one of the worst nights of my life. Marcus didn't deny the messages, but he also didn't take responsibility. He inverted everything, said I had pushed him to it, that I was cold, that I didn't pay attention to him, that he had needs I didn't fulfill. "If you were a better wife, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere," he said, looking straight into my eyes without blinking. And the scariest part is that, for a moment, I almost believed it, because he spoke with such conviction, with such certainty, that I started questioning my own sanity. Maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I really had failed as a wife. Maybe I deserved that. But then he made a mistake, he said. "And that pregnant woman? It's not even my child. She's trying to extort me." It was such an obvious lie, so blatant, that something inside me broke. It didn't break in the sense of destroying me more, but in the sense of freeing me. Because in that moment, I saw with crystal clarity, Marcus was a pathological liar. He lied when he was caught, lied when he didn't need to, lied because he could. Because he always had been able to, because women like me always believed. But I wasn't going to believe anymore. I looked at that man I had called husband and saw a stranger. A dangerous stranger. I asked for divorce that same night. And that's when the real Marcus fully revealed himself. He didn't get sad. He didn't truly apologize. He didn't try to save the marriage. He got furious. Furious because he was losing control over me. "You're not going anywhere," he said, blocking the door. "You're my wife, you Maji vows. You're staying here and working this out with me, but this Chimi, I didn't back down. I grabbed my cell phone and said, 'Either you get out of the way, or I'm calling the police.' He looked at me as if he didn't recognize me, and maybe he really didn't recognize me anymore, because the Ruby who accepted everything, who swallowed everything, who blamed herself for everything, had died on that bathroom floor 3 weeks ago. He got out of the way, but not out of my life. In the following days, Marcus launched a campaign of psychological terror. Constant calls, messages every hour, showing up at my work unannounced, following my car, telling everyone that I was having a psychotic break, that I was making things up, that I needed psychiatric help. He called my sister saying he was worried about me, that I was acting strangely, that maybe I needed to be committed. He was so convincing that some people believed him, and that was almost worse than the betrayals, because he was trying to make me look crazy, trying to make the whole world doubt my sanity. My son was in the middle of this war. Marcus started manipulating him, saying I was destroying our family on a whim, that I was being selfish, that I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself. My son, who was only 13, got confused, hurt, not knowing who to believe. He started distancing himself from me, spent more time in his room, responded with monosyllables, looked at me with something that seemed like accusation. And Marcus loved it. He was using my own son as a weapon against me, and it worked, because there is no greater pain for a mother than seeing her son pulling away, judging, choosing the side of the man who was destroying everything. I sought out a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chun, who had a reputation for being relentless in divorce cases. She listened to my story, saw the evidence I had collected, and said, "Ruby, you have a strong case, but I need you to understand. Men like Marcus don't give up easily. He's going to try to destroy you in every possible way. Financially, emotionally, socially. You need to be prepared for a war." I said I was prepared, but I wasn't. Not really. Because you're never prepared to see someone who swore to love you transform into your worst enemy. Marcus started hiding money, closed joint bank accounts without telling me, transferred assets to his mother's name, stopped paying household bills, letting notices for electricity cut off, water, internet pile up, all strategic, all calculated to force me to give up the divorce, to make me come back begging, to prove I couldn't survive without him. And it partially worked. I went into financial panic. My sewing business wasn't generating enough income to cover all expenses. I had to choose between paying the lawyer or paying basic bills. I started selling things from the house: furniture, appliances, jewelry I had received as gifts, anything to survive one more month, one more week, one more day. And then Marcus played the cruelest card. He filed for full custody of my son, alleged I was emotionally unstable, financially incapable, a negative influence. He presented false witnesses, distorted facts, painted a portrait of me as a negligent mother and unbalanced woman. The hearing was devastating. Me sitting in court, hearing lie after lie being told about me, seeing the judge write everything down with a serious expression, feeling my world crumble brick by brick. My son was called to testify. He looked at me with confused and hurt eyes, and when the judge asked who he preferred to stay with, he hesitated. That hesitation killed me. My own son doubting me. Custody was temporarily shared, but Marcus got primary physical custody. My son would live with him. I would have the right to supervise visits until I demonstrated adequate emotional and financial stability, according to the judge. I left that courthouse staggering, without air, without ground, without anything. I had lost my son. I had lost my house because I couldn't pay for it alone. I had lost my reputation because Marcus had spread lies all over town. I had lost my faith in justice because the system had believed the charming man in a well-cut suit instead of the exhausted and broken woman. I moved into a tiny apartment, a bedroom and living room in an old building on the wrong side of town. It had no furniture, just a mattress on the floor and cardboard boxers. I would sit on that mattress at night, looking at the empty walls, and think, how did I get here? How did I let this happen again? I had fled from Danny only to fall into the arms of someone even more dangerous, even more destructive. Marcus didn't drink, didn't yell, didn't hit, but he had destroyed me in ways Danny never could. He had taken my son, my house, my sanity, my very identity. And the worst part was that no one saw it. To the outside world, Marcus was the victim the good man who had been abandoned by his ungrateful and unstable wife, and I was the villain of the story he had written so carefully, and which the whole world had believed without questioning. I started waking up at 3 in the morning every day, not by choice, but because my body simply couldn't sleep anymore. I would open my eyes in the darkness of that tiny apartment, heart racing, cold sweat on my forehead, and the weight of everything I had lost crushing my chest like a giant stone. Those were the worst hours. Those between dawn and sunrise, when the silence is so deep you can't escape your own thoughts. And my thoughts were cruel. They told me I was a failure, that I had lost my son, that I deserved all of it, that it would be better if I just disappeared. The supervised visits with my son happened once a week at a cold and institutional family center. A woman with a clipboard sat in the corner of the room, writing down every word, every gesture, every interaction. My son would arrive tense, looking at his feet, answering my questions with yes or no. I tried to hug him, and he would stiffen in my arms, as if I were a stranger. Marcus had done such a complete job of alienation that my own son didn't recognize me as his mother anymore. He saw me as the woman who had destroyed our family, who had kicked out the stepfather who took care of him, who was crazy and dangerous. Each visit ended with me crying in the car, alone, hands shaking on the steering wheel, without strength to drive back to that empty apartment. I stopped eating properly, not because I was dieting, but because food had lost its taste. I would open the refrigerator, see the expired milk and moldy bread, and simply close it again. I lived on black coffee and cream crackers. I lost another 15 pounds. My pants fell off my hips. My blouses were huge. My face became skeletal. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Sunken eyes, pale skin, lifeless hair. I looked like a ghost. And in a way, I was. A ghost of the woman I had been, wandering through a life that no longer made sense. My sewing business collapsed. I couldn't concentrate anymore. I would pick up fabric to cut and stare at it for hours, mind blank, hands motionless. I missed deadlines, canceled orders, returned money to clients. People stopped looking for me. And with the income disappearing, the bills piled up even more. An eviction notice arrived after 3 months of late rent. I looked at that official paper with bold letters saying I had 30 days to leave and felt a strange calm. Part of me thought, good. At least this will end soon. I was giving up, not consciously and declaredly, but silently and progressively. I was letting myself die little by little. It was around this time that the thoughts started. Thoughts about not being here anymore, about how it would be easier to simply ... disappear. I would drive on the highway and look at the posts, at the bridges, at the trucks passing at high speed, and think how quick it would be, how simple it would be, how it would be the end of all that unbearable pain. I didn't have a concrete plan, but the thoughts were there, persistent, seductive, whispering that there was a way out, and that way out was permanent. I didn't tell anyone, because if you tell people you're thinking about dying, they try to save you. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to be saved. One night, I was in the bathroom of that miserable apartment, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, holding a bottle of pain pills they had given me after a tooth surgery years ago. I poured them all into my hand. There were maybe 25 small white pills. I stared at them, thinking how easy it would be. Swallow them all at once, lie in bed, sleep, and not wake up anymore. There would be no more pain, no more humiliation. No more having to live knowing my son hated me, that Marcus had won, that I had failed at everything that mattered. My hand trembled. My tears fell on the pills, wetting them, and then my phone rang. It was my sister Rachel. She didn't know what I was doing. She was just calling because she had tried to contact me for days and I hadn't responded. "Ruby, where are you? I'm worried about you," she said, and something in her voice, something in the genuine concern I heard, made me hesitate. I looked at the pills in my hand, looked at the phone, and thought, if I do this, Marcus wins completely. He doesn't just take my life, he takes my story. He becomes the victim of his crazy ex-wife's suicide, and my son grows up thinking his mother was too weak to fight. That idea, more than anything else, made me put the pills back in the bottle. Not because I was ready to live, but because I wasn't willing to give Marcus that final victory. I told Rochelle. Not in that call, but a few days later, when she showed up at my door unannounced. She saw the state of the apartment, saw the state of me, and simply came in and hugged me. And I collapsed. I told her everything. The suicidal thoughts, the despair, the feeling of drowning with no one around to save me. Rachel cried with me. She held me while I sobbed, saying repeatedly, "I can't take it anymore. I can't do it anymore." And she responded, "Then don't take it alone. Let me help you. Please." It was the first time in months that someone really saw me. Not the crazy version Marcus painted, but the real Ruby, broken, desperate, but still alive. Rachel took me to a psychiatrist. I didn't want to go. I was afraid they would diagnose something Marcus could use against me in court that would confirm his narrative that I was unstable. But Rachel insisted, "You need professional help, Ruby. This isn't weakness. It's survival." The psychiatrist, a kind man named Dr. Harrison, listened to me for a full hour without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Ruby, you're not crazy. You're traumatized. You were a victim of severe psychological abuse, parental alienation, systematic emotional violence. You developed depression and anxiety as a response to a toxic environment. But this has treatment. You can recover." They were the first words of hope I had heard in a long time. He prescribed antidepressants. I hesitated to take them. I had heard so many negative things about psychiatric medication, about how it changed your personality, about how you became dependent, but Dr. Harrison explained, "Think of it like a splint for a broken bone. You wouldn't leave a broken leg without support, right? Your brain chemistry is broken right now. Medication is the support while you heal." So I took them, and in the first weeks, nothing changed. In fact, some side effects made me feel worse. But after a month, I noticed a subtle difference. The suicidal thoughts decreased in frequency. I could sleep a few hours straight. The constant fog covering my brain started to dissipate a little, but medication alone wasn't enough. Dr. Harrison referred me to a therapist specializing in trauma and domestic abuse. Dr. Maria Santos was a small woman of Latin origin with penetrating eyes that seemed to see through all your defenses. Our first session was difficult. She asked me questions no one had asked before. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, without worrying about someone's reaction? I couldn't answer because I didn't remember. When was the last time you felt safe? Again, silence. She wrote everything down, and at the end said, "Ruby, we're going to work together so you can relearn who you are without Marcus's voice in your head. It's going to be difficult. It's going to hurt, but it's possible." The therapy sessions were like surgery without anesthesia. Dr. Santos made me revisit memories I had tried to bury, made me see behavior patterns I had normalized, showed me how Marcus had used classic narcissistic manipulation techniques: idealization, devaluation, discard. How he had systematically isolated me, destroyed my self-esteem, made me emotionally dependent, and then discarded me when I no longer served his purposes. Hearing that out loud, having someone name and validate my experience, was both liberating and devastating, because it meant I hadn't imagined anything. It meant the abuse was real, but it also meant I had to accept that I had lost years of my life in a psychological prison. Rachel helped me with money to pay the late rent, avoiding eviction. My childhood best friend, Sarah Chun, who I had lost contact with because of the isolation Marcus imposed, reappeared in my life. She had heard through others about my situation and simply showed up with shopping bags full of food. "You disappear from my life for 3 years and think I'm going to let you starve now?" she said, half joking, half serious. She started showing up every week, bringing food, sometimes just sitting with me on the couch watching TV in silence. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't judge. She was just there. And that silent presence, that unconditional love, was as important as therapy and medication. But even with help, the days were a constant struggle. I had good days where I could shower, eat a full meal, even work a few hours on sewing. And I had bad days where I couldn't get out of bed, where the weight of depression was so physical it felt like someone was sitting on my chest preventing me from breathing. On those bad days, I would look at the antidepressant bottle and think, this isn't working. Nothing is working. I'm never going to get better. But then I would call Rachel, or Sarah, or Dr. Santos, and they would remind me, recovery isn't linear. You don't heal trauma in a straight line. You heal in spirals, sometimes going up, sometimes going down, but always, always moving. The divorce process dragged on. Marcus was doing everything possible to prolong it, to bleed my financial and emotional resources until I had nothing left. Each hearing was torture, seeing his face, hearing his lies, feeling the judge's eyes evaluating me, judging me. My lawyer Patricia fought bravely, but the system was slow, bureaucratic, frequently unfair. Cases like yours can take years, she warned me, years. I didn't know if I had years. Didn't know if I had months. Some days I barely knew if I had the next day. But for some reason I couldn't fully explain. I kept waking up every morning, kept breathing, kept existing, not because I particularly wanted to, but because giving up meant giving Marcus what he wanted most. My complete annihilation and that stubbornness, that obstinate refusal to give him that final satisfaction, became the only thing keeping me alive when nothing else seemed to matter. The change didn't come like lightning. It wasn't a cinematic moment where I woke up one morning different, enlightened, ready to conquer the world. It was more like the sun rising slowly after a very long night. Imperceptible at first, then gradual, until suddenly you realize you can see again. And the beginning of that change came from an unexpected place. From my best friend. Sarah offering something that seemed absurdly simple at the time, but would be revolutionary. Ruby, she said on a Thursday afternoon, sitting on my old stained couch, come work with me. My boss needs someone for customer service at the boutique. It doesn't pay much, but it's something, and it'll get you out of this apartment. My first reaction was pure terror. Work with people. Have to smile, talk, pretend everything was fine when inside I was shattered. It seemed impossible. I can't, Sarah. Look at me. I can barely get dressed in the morning. How am I going to help customers? But Sarah didn't accept my excuse. That's exactly why you need to. You can't stay here drowning in your thoughts. You need a reason to get out of bed, to shower, to get dressed. And you know what else? You need to remember there's a world beyond Marcus, beyond court, beyond this pain, a world where you can just be Ruby again. She was right. I hated to admit it, but she was right. I started working at Sarah's boutique the next week. The first days were agony. I forced myself to smile at customers, but my face hurt from the effort. My hands trembled when I took their credit cards. I hid in the bathroom between one service and another, breathing deeply, convincing myself not to run away. But Sarah was always nearby, supporting me with encouraging looks, covering my mistakes, being patient with my slow pace. And after a few weeks, something strange started to happen. I started really listening to customers' conversations, their stories, their problems, their lives. And I realized everyone was dealing with something. No one had a perfect life, and somehow that made me feel less alone, less abnormal, less broken, beyond repair. The boutique salary wasn't big, but it was mine. Money I had earned with my own work, that no one could take from me, that no one could use as a control tool. I opened a new bank account, just to mine, without anyone's name but mine. And when I deposited that first check and saw the balance on the ATM screen, I cried right there in front of the bank. It was only $400. But it was my $400. It was the first step toward real independence, toward financial autonomy, toward not needing anyone to survive. It was small, but it was a beginning. And beginnings matter more than we think when you've spent so long trapped in an endless ending. Sarah started taking me to other places after work. Beauty salon, for example. When was the last time you took care of yourself? She asked, and I couldn't answer. Because it had been so long, I didn't even remember. At the salon, the hairdresser washed my hair, massaged my scalp, cut the dead ends, applied a dye to cover the gray hairs that had appeared in recent months. And when she turned the chair for me to see myself in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I was unrecognizable, but because for the first time in a long time, I saw a person there. Not a ghost, Not a shadow. A how person with color in her face, shine in her hair, something that looked dangerously like life in her eyes. I started going to the gym with Sarah. Not because I wanted to lose weight or get in shape, but because she said, exercise helps with anxiety and depression. It's science. And she was right. The first days were pathetic. I could barely run 3 minutes on the treadmill without getting out of breath, but I continued. And gradually, I started feeling my body waking up again. Muscles I didn't know I had ached. I sweated, breathed hard, felt my heart beating strong in my chest. And that physical discomfort was strangely comforting, because it was a different pain. It wasn't emotional pain. It was pain from effort, from progress, from being alive and moving. And after workouts, when the endorphins hit, I had a few minutes of mental clarity, of peace, of something that could be called happiness. It was during one of those moments of clarity that I had a revelation. I was walking back home after the gym, sweaty, tired, but in a good way, when suddenly I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and thought, I didn't think about Marcus in the last 2 hours. 2 whole hours without that constant weight, without that voice in my head telling me I was a failure, without that pain in my chest that had become so familiar. 2 hours of freedom, and if I could manage 2 hours, maybe I could manage 3, then 4, then a whole day. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild a life where Marcus was just a bad memory, not the central force controlling my every thought. I returned to therapy with Dr. Santos with renewed determination. I want to understand, I told her. I want to understand how I let it happen twice, how I chose Danny, survived him, and then chose Marcus, who was worse. What's wrong with me? She looked at me with that intensity that completely disarmed me and said, Ruby, there's nothing wrong with you. You were a traumatized child who learned that love meant pain, that attention came with conditions, that you had to make yourself small to be accepted. You attracted men who confirmed those beliefs because they were familiar. You didn't choose abusers because you're stupid or weak. You chose them because your trauma told you that's all you deserved. But now you're learning differently. You're learning that you deserve kindness, respect, peace, and that learning is going to change everything. I started doing things alone. Small things at first. Going to the movies alone to see a film I wanted to see. Eating dinner alone at a restaurant without being ashamed. Driving to the beach on a Sunday and sitting on the sand just watching the waves. Each of these actions seemed revolutionary, because for so long I had been conditioned to believe that a woman alone was a failed woman, that I needed a man to have value, to have purpose, to have life. But the more I did things alone, the more I realized I wasn't alone in a negative way. I was in my own company, and my company, I discovered, surprised, wasn't terrible. I even kinda liked it. The situation with my son continued to be painful. The supervised visits were still tense, cold, distant, but I started changing my approach. Instead of trying to force deep conversations or seek validation from him, I simply showed presence. I brought things he liked, played the games he wanted to play, asked about school, about friends, about hobbies, without pressure, without demands. And slowly, very slowly, I saw small cracks in the wall Marcus had built between us. My son laughed at a silly joke I made. He told me about a test that went well. He accepted a hug at the end of a visit without being completely stiff. They were crumbs of connection, but to me they were feasts. Because they meant I hadn't lost him completely. There was still hope. My lawyer, Patricia, called with news that changed everything. One of the women Marcus had a relationship with had contacted her. The woman, whose name was Jennifer, was willing to testify. She had found out about me, about the other women, about the entire web of lies Marcus had woven. And she was furious. He made me the same promises he made you, Jennifer said when we met. Told me he was going to leave his wife, that I was the love of his life, that we were going to build a family together. I had the baby, Ruby, and he disappeared, changed his number, blocked my social media, vanished like smoke. I'm raising my daughter alone while he plays Father of the Year with your son. Hearing that was both validating and devastating. Validating because it confirmed everything I had said about Marcus. Devastating because it showed the extent of his cruelty. With Jennifer's testimony, plus evidence of the hidden bank accounts Patricia had managed to discover, and a detailed psychological report on parental alienation, we finally had a solid case. The next hearing was different. Marcus was no longer confident, no longer in control. He sweated, stuttered, contradicted his own statements. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a severe expression, listened to everything in silence and then made a decision that made me have to hold onto the table to keep from falling. Custody would be reevaluated. My son would undergo independent psychological evaluation, and visits would no longer be supervised. I don't see evidence justifying continued supervision, the judge said, looking directly at Marcus. In fact, Mr. Coldwell, I'm quite concerned about what I heard today about your actions. I left that courthouse almost floating. It wasn't complete victory yet, but it was the first time the system had really heard me, had seen through Marcus's facade, had recognized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the crazy one in this story. Patricia hugged me in front of the courthouse and said, "You held firm, Ruby, and now things are going to really start changing." I wanted to believe her, but I was also afraid, because I knew men like Marcus didn't accept defeat quietly. They retaliated. And I was right to be afraid, because 2 days later, Marcus showed up at the boutique where I worked. He was different. He wasn't the charming and controlled Marcus. He was the desperate Marcus. And desperate, I discovered in that moment, was much more dangerous. He grabbed my arm when I tried to pull away, his fingers squeezing too hard, his eyes with a gleam I had never seen before, and whispered very quietly, just for me to hear, "You think you're going to defeat me? You don't know what I'm capable of, Ruby. You have no idea what I can do when I'm pushed against the wall." Sarah saw the whole scene. She didn't hear what Marcus whispered, but she saw the way he grabbed my arm, saw the terror on my face, and immediately called the police. Marcus let go of my arm when he realized there were witnesses, adjusted his tie, put that fake smile back on his face and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I just came to see how my wife is doing. I'm worried about her." But the mask had cracked. Everyone in the store saw. And when the police arrived 15 minutes later, I did something I had never done before. I filed a formal complaint. Harassment, threat, invasion of my workplace. The officer who took my statement was a young woman with kind eyes who said, "You're doing the right thing." Men like that only stop when there are real consequences. I got a temporary restraining order. Marcus had to stay at least 200 meters away from me, from my work, from my home. The order was served to him by an officer, and according to Patricia, he was livid. "He didn't expect you to have the courage," she said. "Men like that count on their victims remaining too scared to act. You surprised him." But the order also made him furious. In the following weeks, he found ways to torment me without technically violating the restraint. Calls from unknown numbers that hung up when I answered. Cars that seemed to follow me but always turned before I was sure. Anonymous messages on social media saying vague but threatening things. He was playing a psychological game, trying to make me feel watched, stalked, unsafe even in my own skin. Dr. Santos taught me techniques to deal with the anxiety these tactics caused. Deep breathing, grounding, mindfulness. "He wants you to panic," she explained. "Wants you to seem unstable, paranoid, crazy. Don't give him that satisfaction. Document everything, report everything, but don't let him occupy space in your head." It was easier said than done, but I tried. I bought a small notebook where I wrote down each incident. Date, time, what happened, who witnessed it. That notebook became my secret weapon, my way of maintaining sanity when everything seemed to be falling apart again. Concrete proof that I wasn't imagining, that the harassment was real, that my fear had foundation. My son's psychological evaluation was scheduled. He would be interviewed by a forensic psychologist specializing in parental alienation cases. I was terrified about what he would say, about how Marcus had programmed him against me. But Patricia calmed me down. These professionals are trained to see through manipulation. They know how to recognize when a child is repeating an adult's words versus expressing their own feelings. The evaluation took 3 sessions over 2 weeks. I couldn't be present, which drove me crazy with anxiety. I spent those 2 weeks biting nails, having nightmares, imagining the worst possible scenarios. Meanwhile, I continued working on rebuilding my life, with the boutique salary plus some sewing jobs I had started accepting again. I managed to buy furniture for the apartment, nothing extravagant, most secondhand or from discount stores, but they were mine. A couch that had no history of fights. A dining table where no one had made me feel small. A bed where I slept alone, but in peace. Each piece of furniture was a brick in building a life that was genuinely mine, free from ghosts and toxic memories. I hung pictures on the walls, bought plants for the window, painted the bedroom a soft blue that calmed me. That apartment that had been a miserable prison was becoming a sanctuary. I reconnected with old friends I had lost during the years with Marcus. Women I had abandoned because he said they were bad influences, who talked too much, who didn't understand our love. I reached out to them one by one, apologized for my disappearance, vaguely explained what had happened. And you know what was surprising? None judged me, they all understood. Some even shared their own stories of toxic relationships, of isolation, of having to rebuild support networks afterward. It's more common than you think, my friend, Lisa said. Most women I know have gone through some version of this. We just don't talk about it enough. And it was liberating to realize I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only one who had fallen into the trap of a charming narcissist. I started attending a support group for women who had left abusive relationships. It was in a church basement on Tuesday nights, chairs in a circle, bad coffee and stale cookies on a side table. The first few times I went, I just listened. Stories of other women, some worse than mine, some different but strangely similar. Patterns that repeated: idealization, isolation, devaluation, discard, different men, similar tactics. And hearing those stories made me understand something fundamental. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't because I chose wrong or because there was something broken in me that attracted abusers. It was because abusers are predators who know how to identify vulnerability, who know exactly what to say and do to trap their victims. And recognizing that lifted an enormous weight off my shoulders. In the 5th group session, I finally spoke. I told my story, or at least the condensed version of it, and when I finished, expecting judgment or pity, what I received was validation. "You're so brave," one woman said. "You got out. You're fighting." Many of us stayed years longer because we were afraid to take that step, and another added, "And you're helping your son get out too. That's heroic." I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired, hurt, still scared most days. But maybe courage isn't the absence of fear. Maybe courage is continuing even when fear is screaming for you to stop. And if that was courage, then maybe I was brave indeed. The psychological evaluation report arrived. Patricia called as soon as she received it. "Ruby, sit down," she said, and my heart sank, because no one asks you to sit down before good news. But then, she continued, "The report is favorable, very favorable." The psychologist had identified clear signs of parental alienation. She noticed that my son repeated phrases that were obviously from adults, that he had inconsistencies in his complaints about me, that he showed anxiety when asked about his father but relaxed when talking about me in moments when he let his guard down. Her recommendation was mandatory family therapy, gradual increase in my custody, and psychological evaluation of Marcus. "This changes everything," Patricia said. "We're winning, Ruby. For real this time." The next hearing was a watershed. The judge read the complete report, heard the ridiculous objections from Marcus's lawyer, and then made her decision with a firmness that left no room for emotional appeals. Shared custody would be implemented immediately. 5th, my son would spend 1 week with me, 1 week with Marcus. Family therapy was mandatory, and if Marcus didn't show up, he would lose custody time. And the cherry on top, Marcus would have to pay back child support, including all the months he had hidden money and left me struggling to survive. I looked at Marcus across the courtroom and saw something I had never seen before: genuine defeat. He was gray, shrunken, small. The great Marcus Caldwell, who had made me feel tiny for so long, was finally tasting his own medicine. But the court victory didn't mean immediate peace. Marcus tried one last desperate move. 2 days before my son was to come spend the first week with me under the new custody arrangement, Marcus tried to flee with him. He picked the boy up from school without notice, drove out of state, turned off the cell phones. It was Jennifer, ironically, who alerted us. She was still in contact with people who knew Marcus, and someone had seen him buying gas near the Tennessee border. Patricia immediately called the police. An arrest warrant was issued for illegal custody of a minor. Marcus was stopped at a police checkpoint 12 hours later, my son in the back seat of the car, confused and scared. That incident was the end of Marcus. The judge who heard the kidnapping case had no mercy. Marcus lost physical custody completely. He would only have supervised visits from that moment on, and would have to undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation before even that would be considered. He was arrested for 72 hours, had to post bail, faced criminal charges that would result in community service and probation. And for the first time since I met that man, I felt something that wasn't fear, anger, or pain. I felt pity. Pity for someone so broken inside that the only way he knew how to exist was by controlling and destroying other people. But that pity didn't mean forgiveness, and it certainly didn't mean I would lower my guard. My son came to live with me. It wasn't an easy transition. He was traumatized by the incident, confused about everything that had happened, still processing years of manipulation. He tested boundaries constantly, expecting me to react the way Marcus would react. But I didn't react. I maintained consistency, kindness, patience. I let him do individual therapy in addition to family therapy. I gave him space when he needed it, but also made it clear I was there, always, unconditionally. And slowly, over months, I saw my son coming back, not the child he was before, because trauma changes people, but a version of him that was stronger, more aware, more capable of recognizing manipulation when he saw it. One night, about 6 months after, he started living with me. He came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I stopped chopping onions and looked at him. "Sorry for what, honey?" And he, with tears in his eyes, said, "For believing the things he said about you, for being cold to you, for not seeing he was lying." My heart broke and healed at the same time. I put down the knife, hugged my son, and said, "You have nothing to apologize for. You were a child being manipulated by an adult. None of this was your fault. None of it." We stood there hugging, both crying, finally beginning to heal together the wounds Marcus had inflicted on both of us. The divorce was finally finalized almost 3 years after I initially filed. 3 years of legal battles, endless hearings, devastating emotional and financial costs. But when the judge banged the gavel and said divorce granted, I felt a weight literally lifting off my shoulders. I was free. Legally, officially, completely free. Marcus no longer had any power over me beyond the monthly supervised visits with our son, which in practice he rarely attended. He had disappeared, found other victims to manipulate, other places to exercise his sick control. And I, finally, could breathe without feeling his invisible hands squeezing my throat. But there was something I still hadn't done. Something Dr. Santos said I would eventually need to do for true closure. I needed to tell my complete story, out loud, without shame, without hiding anything. And I needed to do it not just for me, but for other women who were where I had been, trapped in thinking there was no possible way out. It was Sarah who had the idea. We were having coffee on a Saturday afternoon, my son was at a friend's house, and she simply said, "Ruby, have you ever thought about sharing your story publicly? Like, really sharing? Not just in the support group, but in a way that could reach women who need to hear this." I laughed nervously. Who would want to hear my story? It's just another difficult divorce story. But Sarah looked at me seriously and said, "It's not just another story. It's the story. It's the story of millions of women who are living right now what you lived. And they need to know that survival is possible, that reconstruction is possible, that they're not alone, and they're not crazy." I thought about it for weeks. The idea terrified and attracted me at the same time. Exposed everything I had lived, all the ugly and shameful parts, all the moments when I stayed, when I should have left, all the mistakes I made. It seemed like too much vulnerability. But it also seemed necessary, Because if my pain could have purpose, if my trauma could transform into a tool to help other people, then maybe everything I went through wouldn't have been completely in vain. I talked to Dr. Santos about it. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Because sharing trauma publicly can be healing, but it can also be re-traumatizing if you're not in a stable place. I honestly thought about the question, and I realized that yes, I was ready. I wasn't completely healed, maybe never would be, but I was strong enough to transform my wounds into wisdom. I started small. I wrote a long post on social media sharing a condensed version of my story. I didn't use Marcus's name, didn't go into details that could identify specific people, but I talked about emotional abuse, about narcissism, about parental alienation, about the long and painful process of reconstruction. I expected maybe a few likes from close friends. What I didn't expect was for the post to go viral. Hundreds, then thousands of people sharing, women in the comments saying, "This is my story, you just described my marriage, I thought I was alone." Private messages flooding my inbox, women asking for advice, asking for hope, asking just to know someone understood what they were going through. It was overwhelming, but also incredibly meaningful. I realized I had touched on something universal, something so many women experienced but about which few spoke openly. So I went further. I created a blog where I started writing more detailed posts about different aspects of emotional abuse, how to recognize early signs, how narcissistic patterns work, how to plan a safe exit, how to deal with the legal system, how to rebuild self-esteem afterward. It wasn't professional counseling. I always made that clear and always encouraged people to seek therapy, but it was lived experience, and that had value. People connected with authenticity in a way they don't connect with academic theory. No matter how correct it is, the bloggy grew. I started receiving invitations to speak at local groups, churches, community centers, women's shelters. I would go and tell my story, without embellishing, without romanticizing, but also without despair. I told the truth. It's difficult. It's painful. It's a long and winding road. But it's possible. You can get out. You can rebuild yourself. You can find peace on the other side. And after each talk, women would come talk to me, some crying, some just wanting to shake my hand, some asking for information about lawyers or therapists. Each conversation showed me I was making a real difference in real people's lives, and that healed something in me I didn't know needed healing. My sewing business came back, but in a different way. Instead of just making custom clothes, I started giving sewing classes to women in vulnerable situations, women who were leaving abusive relationships, who needed a skill to earn income, who needed community and purpose. I taught for free, using part of the income I now earned from speaking engagements to buy materials. Those classes became more than just learning to sew. They became safe spaces where women could speak freely, share stories, laugh, cry, support each other, rebuild not just clothes, but entire lives, stitch by stitch. My relationship with my son flourished in ways I didn't think would be possible. He was 15 now, almost an adult, and had developed impressive awareness about healthy versus toxic relationships. He spoke openly about therapy, about how he was processing everything that had happened, about how he was learning different patterns from what he had seen modeled by Marcus. "I'm never going to be like him, Mom," he told me one night. "I saw what he did to you, to me, to other people, and I choose to be different." And my heart exploded with pride, not because he was perfect, but because he was conscious, because he was making active choices about what kind of man he wanted to be. And those choices would lead him to a very different future from the path Marcus had walked. I found love again, but in a completely different way. It wasn't sought, wasn't desperate, wasn't to fill a void. It was organic, slow, built on genuine friendship first. Tom was a kind man I met at the support group, not as a participant, but as a volunteer who helped organize the meetings. He had lost his sister to domestic violence years ago and dedicated time to related causes. We talked for months before anything romantic emerged, and when it did, it was gentle, respectful, without pressure. He understood my triggers, respected my boundaries, never tried to rush me or control me, and for the first time in my life, I understood what healthy love should look like. Partnership, not prison. Support, not control. Freedom, not possession. I won't lie and say everything became perfect, because it didn't. I still have bad days. Days where anxiety comes back strong, where memories surfaced without warning, where I catch myself doubting myself or being afraid without apparent reason. Trauma doesn't completely disappear. It just becomes more manageable. I learned to recognize my triggers, to use tools therapy gave me, to ask for help when I need it, and I learned something fundamental. Healing isn't linear. You don't wake up one day completely healed and ready. You heal in spirals. Sometimes it seems you're going backward when actually you're just revisiting old wounds from a stronger place, with more tools, with more wisdom. Financially, my life stabilized. The sewing business generates consistent income, the speaking engagements bring some extra money, and the child support Marcus was finally forced to pay help of my son's expenses. I'm not rich, but I'm stable. And more importantly, I'm independent. No one can control me through money. No one can trap me using financial dependence as a tool. I have my own account, my own house, my own livelihood, and that independence is worth more than any amount of money Marcus could have given me when he was trying to buy me with gifts while destroying me inside. I made peace with my past in ways I didn't think would be possible, even with my mother, who had disappeared when I was 7. She reappeared in my life 2 years ago, weakened by age and mental illness that was never properly treated, but wanting to reconnect. It was difficult. There was anger, resentment, so many questions without satisfactory answers. But there was also understanding. My mother did the best she could with the limited tools she had, at a time when depression was stigma and treatment was luxury. It doesn't justify the abandonment, but it can. And although our relationship will never be what it could have been, there now exists a fragile but real connection. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it means letting go of the weight of resentment that only hurts the one who carries it. Looking back now, at that 15-year-old pregnant girl, at the woman in her early 30s holding pills in the bathroom ready to give up, I feel simultaneously deep sadness and immense pride. Sadness for everything she had to go through, for all the pain that was avoidable, if the right people had intervened, if systems had worked better, if she had had the tools earlier, but also pride, because she survived. More than survived, she transformed trauma into purpose, pain into power, brokenness into reconstruction. She is me, and I am her. And together we went through hell and came out the other side, not without scars, but alive, functional, even prospering in ways that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with inner peace. If you're reading this, or rather, if you're hearing my story now and recognize pieces of your own story in it, I want you to know some things. First, you're not crazy. If he's making you question your sanity, making you doubt your own memory and perception, manipulating your reality, this has a name. It's called gaslighting, and it's a form of abuse. You're not imagining it. Second, it's not your fault, no matter what he says, how many times he convinces you that you provoked it, that you deserve it, that you're the problem. It's not true. Abusers are experts at inverting blame. You didn't cause his abusive behavior. He chooses to act this way. Third, you can get out. I know it seems impossible now, that there are 1,000 reasons to stay, that the fear is paralyzing, but people get out every day. I got out. Women more trapped than me got out, and you can too. It won't be easy. I won't romanticize or minimize. It's going to be one of the hardest things you've ever done. It will require planning, courage, support, resources. There will be days where you doubt if you made the right choice, where loneliness seems worse than abuse, where you miss even the crumbs of affection he occasionally threw. But on the other side, there's life, real, authentic, peaceful life. There's the possibility of waking up without fear, of making decisions without needing permission, of being yourself without punishment. There's the chance for your children to grow up seeing what healthy relationships look like, instead of normalizing abuse. There's a future, and that future can be beautiful if you give yourself the chance to reach it. Seek help. Call the domestic violence hotline. Talk to a therapist specializing in trauma. Consult a lawyer who understands abuse cases. Connect with support groups. Talk to a friend or family member you trust. You don't have to do this alone, and in fact, you shouldn't. Isolation is the abuser's favorite tool. Breaking that isolation is the first crucial step. And if the first resource you seek doesn't help, seek another. Not every professional understands abuse dynamics, unfortunately, but the good ones exist, and they deserve to be found. Don't give up just because the first door you knocked on didn't open. And finally, you're stronger than you think. I know it doesn't seem that way now, when you're exhausted, defeated, broken into 1,000 pieces. But strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you fall. It's about continuing to breathe when everything in you wants to stop. It's about choosing yourself when all your programming tells you to choose him. And you have that strength, even if you don't feel it yet. It's there, buried under layers of trauma and manipulation, but it's there. And when you finally access it, when you finally reclaim your own power back, it will be transformative. You'll look back one day and won't believe you were that person. Not because you transformed into someone completely different, but because you finally became who you always were without his chains holding you down. My name is Ruby Fitzgerald. I got married at 15 to a man who got me pregnant, survived alcoholism and betrayal, rebuilt alone. Married again to a narcissist who almost completely destroyed me, temporarily lost my son, almost lost my life, but finally found my strength and my voice. Today I'm 43 years old. I have a wonderful teenage son, a thriving business, a community of women who support each other, a kind partner, and most importantly, I have peace. Inner peace that no amount of money can buy, that no man can give or take away, that only comes from making peace with yourself and your past. And if I could get here, starting from the rock bottom where I was, believe me, you can too. The door is there. It might be locked, it might be heavy, it might seem insurmountable, but the key is in your hand. It always has been. You just need to have the courage to use it. And when you do, when you finally push that door open and step to the other side, you'll discover the world is much bigger, much more beautiful, much more full of possibilities than he ever let you believe. Your life is waiting for you. Go get it. You deserve it.